2018's The Clove Hitch Killer is a deceptively simple film. It tells the story of a serial killer who has long integrated himself into society and kept his crimes a secret, under the guise of a loving family man who has become a well-respected and prominent leader within his community. At least, that is, until his son uncovers his collection of BDSM material and more alarmingly sinister Polaroids depicting bound women that lead him to suspect his father is the elusive titular killer. While many might be quick to call spoilers for such an obvious setup, the film never attempts to hide this revelation or misdirect you in any way. As director Duncan Skiles told Filmmaker magazine, the story is presented as very matter-of-factly. It isn't about surprises or a dramatic payoff where we find evidence to expose the truth, as they say. It's a much more muted, somber affair that leaves you feeling more depressed than purely disturbed. Now, for context, it's pretty clear out the gate that the Clove Hitch Killer was loosely inspired by the true crimes of Dennis Rader, aka the BTK Killer, bind, torture, kill. Yet, in various interviews, Skiles has routinely avoided naming direct influences as to not give living killers like Rader the attention they crave. That said, the comparison is unavoidable and frankly not that subtle, given the film's killer is not only named after his favourite type of knot, the clove hitch, but his history and MO is almost identical to BTK. He targeted women, he bound, strangled and suffocated them, he stole their possessions including their IDs, he taunted the police, he had an over a decade long cooling off period as Last Podcast calls it, he even relived his fantasies by cross-dressing as victims, and most thematically significant to the film, he was popular and well respected within his community. There's nothing here that isn't general knowledge of BTK, and it's all present in the Clove Hitch Killer. However, the film is approached with tasteful nuance. It doesn't show us his murders or dramatically emphasize his sinister nature. As Skiles described, it's reserved in its approach, instead focusing on the son Tyler's increasing disillusionment and distrust for his own father. At the end of the day, Clove Hitch isn't really about the killer. It's about shattering the phony illusion of a killer hiding in plain sight, the tells they give away with hindsight, and their desperate need to retain control to satisfy their urges. Before we go any further, this video is sponsored by MeUndies. As we all know, one of mankind's biggest struggles is comfortable, quality, long-lasting underwear, and MeUndies has brought us the perfect solution, and for me personally, a very late reminder in life that cheap, crappy underwear can actually ruin your day. Seriously, these bad boys have got rid of all the itching, chafing, and discomfort I get from regular underwear. I just never put much thought into it, and MeUndies, for the better, have made me regret not being more compassionate for my stuff. Sounds like too much information, but trust me, I would not be doing this if I didn't genuinely love them and want to recommend MeUndies. MeUndies are made of a soft, airy, stretchy fabric that feels very pleasant on the skin, especially their durable waistband, which doesn't dig into me like other cheap underwear I've had in the past. I also have MeUndies lounge pants, which are again super comfortable, warm and breathable, and honestly at this point I'm just using them as PJs because I just don't want to take them off because they're really relaxing to sit around in. You can get 20% off your first order plus free shipping by going to meundies.com/Ryan and entering the promo code Ryan at checkout.
Is this what I'm doing with my life right now?
The film opens by establishing a rural town in Kentucky that every year memorializes the 10 known victims to the Clove Hitch Killer, who seemingly vanished 10 years ago after many years terrorizing the town. Almost immediately, your finger is pointed at Don Burnside, a fairly normal husband and father deeply embedded within the church and community, who also happens to be the local fucking scoutmaster. From this role alone, he's shown to be commanding, charismatic, and as you'd expect, pretty good with knots. There's a natural dominance on display, shown through his leadership and innocuous actions that take on new context knowing he's the killer, such as randomly putting his son Tyler in a headlock until he submits. Some aspects of Don's character are more subtle than others, but as Skiles explained in an interview with Film Threat, the film firmly retains a feeling of domestic banality by accentuating a fairly normal world. Atmospherically, it manages to retain a surprising amount of tension despite forgoing most of the genre tropes you'd expect from a film like this. The presentation is very subversive. The music is minimal and low-key sad as opposed to brooding and spooky. It emphasizes daylight over nighttime to make the atmosphere feel seemingly calm and pleasant, and the overall setting itself is super clean and weirdly sanitized, instead of run down or evidently dramatized to look like a town that's gone through so much fear and distress over the years. It feels incredibly naturalistic, and yet it finds ways to subtly convey that underlying threat, if so implied, such as framing much of Tyler's perspective through door frames and empty space that creates a feeling of claustrophobia and oppression living in a strict religious household, while also showing the growing disconnect and disillusionment he feels towards those around him. The catalyst to Tyler's journey is when he one night goes on a date using his father's truck without permission, only for the girl to find a magazine photo of a bound woman, which she assumes might be Tyler's, subsequently leading him to become alienated from his peers when kink-shaming rumors get around town. What's key here is that the town is built on a somewhat rigid, moderately conservative Christian community, where not only does everyone seem to talk, but there's this pressure and anxiety to maintain these vague norms, morals, and Christian values that naturally some of the young ones are starting to rebel against. In the case of Tyler, he lives in the shadow of his father, who has a reputation for basically being a good person, a man of God, and thus he's effectively assumed the persona of the town's most loving, caring, harmless role model. Yet, it creates a harrowing undercurrent of how blind these people are to the truth when we go into the film with the understanding Dawn will eventually be exposed, or at least, we hope so. Tyler questions if the magazine photo belongs to his dad and sneaks into Dawn's shed where he uncovers a secret stash of BDSM magazines and a Polaroid of a restrained woman called Nora, thus suspecting his father might be connected to the Clove Hitch killer. Now, there's a strong chance you've seen films like this before where the overzealous teenager plays sleuthing hero and falls into peril like Disturbia or Summer of '84, but Skiles claimed that he was much more inspired by films like the 1988 Dutch psychological thriller The Vanishing. I'm not going to say anything about The Vanishing other than it has perhaps one of the most infamous and powerful final acts of any psychological thriller, but that film perfectly helps put Clove Hitch into perspective, where it's not about knowing who the killer is, but rather questioning if it's a road you truly want to go down for the greater good, or continue living in ignorance as to not disturb the seemingly peaceful status quo. I'll loosely come back to that point at the end because it ties directly into how the film draws its conclusion from the inevitable confirmation, but the journey we take to get there is a rather empathetic look at how a discovery can change your worldview to the point that you question everything you've been raised to believe and wonder if anything in your life truly matters if it's effectively all a lie. Anyway. One day, after Tyler's mother Cindy catches him looking at what she thinks is porn when he's actually researching the killer, Dawn spells out one of the film's biggest themes during his father-son bonding session. In an effort to be subtly vulnerable and profound, he explains that God made man in his own image, and our bodies are desecrated with sin due to intrusive thoughts and challenging urges like sexual desire. However, his point is starkly hypocritical because he tells Tyler it's okay to imagine stuff because it's only fantasy, but looking at porn is bad because it's very real, even though it's come to light that Dawn has a massive collection of porn and victim photos to fap off to. It's very much a do as I say, not as I do type situation. I actually think what it's trying to do here is subtextually have Dawn try and justify his own urges to himself as okay because man is inherently sinful and we can repent, which is pure psychopathic nonsense. It's obviously an extreme example, but Dawn uses religion as a shield to protect his own urges because the implication is that he truly has stopped killing to focus on his family, but his trophies, shall we say, are a way for him to relive his crimes to moderate those urges. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, the rules simply don't matter. It's a criticism you could give to any killer and their code, kind of like Dexter, who thinks he can justify justify his murderous urges as some form of greater good, but at the end of the day, self-preservation is number one, and the rules change to suit that core objective. In Don's case, he's trying to pacify Tyler through a form of guilt and judgment that's wrapped in vague empathy. He tells Tyler he'll keep his shenanigans a secret from his even stricter and more devout mother Cindy, creating a sense of trust that's mainly to serve Don's own interests. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't try to make you sympathize with Don or humanize the killer in any way. Beneath everything he does, he's always out for himself, but it plays up the complexity of him living a double life where you're just never certain how in control of his urges he is, which of course leads us to the second half. After Tyler teams up with an aspiring journalist called Cassie, who happens to be the town's local expert on the Clove Hitch killer for reasons I'll explain later, they discover that Don's photos and pornography are now gone, but once they dig deeper, they find crude plans for a HH home-style torture dungeon, which we can assume is just a fantasy to quench Don's urges, as echoed in his earlier conversation with Tyler. However, almost immediately after, Tyler uncovers a secret man cave beneath the house, containing not only the missing porn and even more Polaroids, but also the victims' IDs, thus confirming his suspicions. Don, of course, is long aware of Tyler's sleuthing, and one day decides to take him on an impromptu camping trip where you think he's going to shoot his own son dead, yet instead he confesses to Tyler that the material is owned by his brother Rudy. Yep, total horseshit. For context, Rudy is established earlier in the film to be in a permanent vegetative state due to a car accident. However, it now seems that Don is twisting the narrative to make it appear like it was the result of a botched suicide attempt after Rudy became overwhelmed with guilt for his apparent murders. What's so brilliant about this scene is that you clearly do not trust Don, but it's reinforced in the nuance of Dylan McDermott's performance, where his efforts to show emotion are clearly fake. As a psychopath, he lacks empathy, nothing about him feels sincere, and while you would hope Tyler would see through this, there is still that fleeting unconditional love he feels for his father. Charlie Plummer's performance further adds to the complexity of the scene, because it's not strictly clear, as of yet, if Tyler buys into his father's story, or is forcing himself to believe it because he doesn't want his suspicions to be true. Don actually ends up shooting himself in the foot at this point because he tells Tyler the reason he kept the material was because he was conflicted over whether to inform the police or destroy it to protect his brother, which prompts Tyler to urge him into destroying it. What's honestly quite funny about it is that Don has no choice but to follow through with his lie when Tyler asks to be there when he destroys the material, and you can just sense how deeply saddened and angry Don feels watching what's effectively his life's work go up in flames. It's kind of gratifying. As time moves on, Tyler is still conflicted and grows increasingly confrontational to the point he gets into an altercation with a classmate, leading Don to send him to scout leader camp, which is something Tyler has always wanted to do, but Don claims they can't afford it. The deeper ulterior motive becomes clear when the second half switches us to Don's perspective, where he's unable to perform for Sydney and has grown irritable in his own ways. After Sydney takes their daughter Susie to visit Sydney's mother for a short vacation, Don is left to his own devices, where after some mundane dissatisfaction trying to live a normal life, naturally he decides he wants to recreate the Polaroids. Again, the film doesn't surprise us with this revelation, it casually drops it on us with the confidence that it knows we never bought into his persona or narrative to begin with. The next 20 minutes or so basically become a near-disturbing dark comedy, because again, like when he destroyed his original trophies, him cross-dressing with his wife's clothing and posing himself like his victims doesn't bring him any satisfaction in the end. It's just not the same, as it were. He pathetically ends up in a childish tantrum and you're just laughing at his suffering, at least until you realize that there is now only one way he can satisfy his urges. Remember when I mentioned how the film takes on a similar dilemma from The Vanishing, where you question if the road you go down to uncover the truth is for the greater good, or if it's simply better to live in ignorance so as to not disturb the status quo? Well, in Tyler's efforts to get his father to destroy the past and subconsciously help his father overcome his demons, so to speak, Tyler indirectly reawakens the Clove Hitch killer. Now, as I said earlier, the film is ambiguous as to whether Dawn was ever planning to kill again, or is now simply just monitoring his urges in private, but ultimately, either way you look at it, he still is the monster that he is. Just because he repents doesn't mean he holds himself accountable. After realizing his needs when he takes a photo of Cassie, who briefly comes over to talk to Tyler, who's still out of town, Dawn ends up stalking and attacking a random woman in her home in pure daylight, which not only adds a disturbing sense of realism, but Dawn's complete apathy, as though it's all a tedious routine, adds a sinister nihilism to the process of a serial killer. However, as his despicable acts continue, Tyler shows up and confronts Dawn with a rifle, with a needlessly long flashback revealing Tyler and Cassie had long plotted to spy on Dawn and catch him in the act, with Cassie's personal obsession being that her mother was one of the Clovehitch killer's previous victims. Dawn once again tries to control the narrative and manipulate Tyler into giving him the gun, even playing up his masculine vulnerability, claiming what's happening is just another human weakness, this time a kinky roleplay affair, but Cassie, not buying his bullshit, tries to confront him only to be incapacitated. When Tyler submits, because deep down when you think about it, he has Stockholm Syndrome for his own father, Dawn tries to kill Tyler, only to find the gun empty, leading to them subduing Dawn, yet oddly, before Cassie can call the police, Tyler stops her for reasons that are thematically bleak. Days later, Dawn's body is discovered in the forest from an apparent suicide. A flashback reveals Cassie helped Tyler frame it this way, as a means to not simply end the reign of the Clovehitch killer, but do so without tarnishing the legacy of his father. Despite unmasking the reality, this is the only man that the town knew, the man who Tyler was raised by. He still loves his father, at least the side he knew. Even if it wasn't real, it felt that way to him. In some respects, they do avenge the victims by ironically using Dawn's fake story about Rudy's suicide attempt to put an end to the chaos, but the impression underneath it all is similar to what Dawn claimed to be doing for Rudy. Tyler is trying to protect his family and the community he cares for. Hell, in Dawn's final moments, he accepts what Tyler is doing. In the end, none of these people knew Dawn as the Clovehitch killer. They knew him as Dawn Burnside, and Tyler instead chooses to keep the killer an urban legend that the town has since long moved on from, even if that pain still lingers. I mean, that said, it doesn't exactly do much for the utterly traumatized woman Dawn attempted to kill, but whatever.